It was a bit too short, wasn't it? Just a couple of days too short. Alright, so we were working on the respiratory system, and we had got to the point where we're looking at gas exchange at the lungs and the pressure gradient between the lungs and the bloodstream and the muscle tissue. I believe this is where we have got to. And then, just a reminder, we finished this today, hopefully. We'll get through this today. We have a review session Wednesday, and the next exam is Friday. Alright, so, welcome back, indeed. I did warn you before we left not to spend the whole week partying. I tried. Alright, Brett. Yes.
Yeah.
Ben, Skylar, Diana, all right. All right, so I don't know why this is coming up so faint. Here we have atmospheric partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere is 159. Remember, we're going to go from high to low. So any diffusion gradient goes from high to low. The steeper the gradient, the easier it is for us to move things from one side of the membrane to the other. So 159 in the atmosphere, the pressure of oxygen in the lungs is about 105. So we have a gradient there. That means we can absorb oxygen, we can move oxygen from the atmosphere into the lungs. And then when we look at the venous blood coming into the lungs from the heart, right? It's lower on oxygen because it's already been around the body. We've used as much of the oxygen as we needed. So we're only looking at somewhere around 40 in this situation. So 40 to 105 is a steep gradient. That means it's very easy to load oxygen out of the lungs into the bloodstream and get it onto the hemoglobin. So we leave, the blood leaving the lungs is up to 100 from 40. Comes around to the heart. The heart doesn't use oxygen from the blood that's inside it. It has its own blood supply. So when the blood leaves the heart, we haven't used any oxygen, so we're still looking at the same kind of number that we had here. And then we're going to pump it out of the heart, off around the body. And what we want is to move the oxygen from the bloodstream into, in our case, muscle tissue. We're looking at using oxygen to create ATP so we can move. So we're going to move it into the muscles, and then when we look at the bloodstream, the other side, coming back to the heart, the oxygen level has gone down, the partial pressure is down, means that we've got less oxygen available here than we had here because we were able to offload it. And if you follow the numbers for carbon dioxide, they're reversed because we're not taking carbon dioxide, we're picking up carbon dioxide so that we can get rid of it into the atmosphere. Yes? Vaguely remember covering that before we left? A week and a half ago. Oh, alright. So, to move a gas or a liquid, we need a pressure gradient. Gases and liquids move from high to low. So, we have a pressure gradient when we're looking at the gas at the oxygen. We also have pressure gradient when we're looking at blood flow through the lungs. Right? So the pressure of the fluid in the veins coming to the lungs, in the artery, coming to the lungs is much higher than it is out the other side. So we see blood flow through the lungs. The highest pressure in the system is in the aortic artery coming out of the heart, out of the left ventricle. So, if I increase blood flow, okay, the more blood, remember all the way back at the beginning of this lecture, the alveoli are surrounded by a capillary network. The more blood I have going through that capillary network, the more oxygen I can pick up. More blood, more hemoglobin, more capability to collect oxygen. So when we exercise, what we want to happen is for more blood to flow through those capillaries so we can get as much oxygen as possible. So that means that the blood pressure in the systemic system has to be lower, has to be higher than it is in the pulmonary system. I want to be able to move blood from my arms, from my limbs, from my heart, through my lungs. So I have to have a low blood pressure in my lungs to move blood as quickly as possible there. So, sometimes what you find is that very highly trained athletes actually exhibit lower oxygen absorption than you would expect because the blood is flowing so quickly through the lungs that it's not there long enough to pick up as much oxygen as you would expect it to, given how fit they are. Now, so you're right at the end of that first section. We've got, hopefully, oxygen into the blood, out of the lungs. Now we need to move it around. So how do we move it around in the bloodstream? So most of it doesn't dissolve in plasma, which is mostly water. We don't dissolve very much oxygen at all. We have to transport it. We have to actually carry it around. So we carry it on red blood cells, and specifically on the hemoglobin within the red blood cells. Hemoglobin has an iron sitting in the middle of it, which will play a really important role when we start looking at what happens if our diets are low in iron and we become a little bit anemic. All right, so iron is within the hemoglobin molecule, and the hemoglobin is in a red blood cell. If it's got oxygen, technical term is oxyhemoglobin. If it doesn't have oxygen, it's deoxyhemoglobin. That's just the technical terms for those two states. And if if you think about it then, how much hemoglobin I have available would dictate how much oxygen I can move around. Okay? If I can't dissolve it in the plasma, I have to have the taxi to pick it up and carry it around. So the more hemoglobin I've got available, the more taxis I have, the more oxygen I can carry to the muscles. So, anemia occurs when we are deficient in red blood cells or hemoglobin that should be in the red blood cells, or some combination of both of those. Okay? And anytime I've got a problem with red blood cells or with hemoglobin, it decreases the taxi system. So I can't carry as much oxygen around if the taxis aren't there, standing in the queue. Just think of it like a load of people pouring out of Grand Central Station at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? And there's a huge long line of taxis waiting to pick them all up. I can have the people on my oxygen, I can have all the oxygen ability moving it into the blood that I can, but if the taxis aren't there to pick it up, I can't take it anywhere. So it wouldn't do me any good. Right? Gotta have the taxi. So what we see is people who are suffering with anemia have a severe impact on their endurance capability. They're not very good at aerobic work when they're anemic. So certain populations are more at risk. Right? If you're iron deficient, could be because you don't eat foods that contain iron. It could be that you eat the food that has the iron, but there's something not working correctly at the digestive level and you're not absorbing that iron appropriately. If you work with female athletes and they have very heavy menstruation, they can be anemic or slightly anemic during that part of the cycle. Women who are pregnant often become anemic, right? And then there are certain populations around the globe whose diet is deficient in iron, and so as a population they tend to be a little anemic. Right? Women tend to be much more at risk than men because of the menstrual cycle situation. So got oxygen onto the taxi and I'm carrying it around the body and I get to a muscle that's working and that muscle needs oxygen to make ATP. So now I've got to get it out of the taxi and into the muscle tissue. Okay, so the next step, the next piece of the pie is having got it onto the hemoglobin, how do I offload it the other end when I'm ready to? Right? So when we look at this graph called an oxyhemoglobin, I can't say this. Every semester I get this wrong. Oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve. Right? Yes. So this is a visual explanation of how we bind and release oxygen at the right taxi stop. Right? I want to pick it up at the right time, I want to let go of it at the right time. So what we find is that at 0% saturation, so my hemoglobin has no oxygen on it, right? And here I've got 100% saturation, I've got lots of oxygen, and I can deliver it to the tissues, right? So temperature affects this curve, right? Here's the blood in my veins, not very much oxygen. Blood in my arteries, a lot more oxygen. And I want to be able to get it out. So what we find is that if we increase the temperature, this whole curve shifts over a little bit. Right? I can get at the oxygen a little bit more quickly, a little bit more easily. It decreases the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. The hemoglobin goes, oh, okay, I'm done carrying you, you can get off now. If I increase the pH, if I make it more acidic, we shift the curve to the right. And it makes it easier for the oxygen to leave the hemoglobin. Those two things are the key, because when we exercise, what happens in the muscle? Sorry? We extend it. What happens with the energy? When I make energy, what do I get? Sweating. I get hot, right? So, the curve may or may not make a lot of sense, right? For math people, the curve is easy. For people who aren't math, the curve gets a little bit scary. The concept is that if I increase the temperature, the curve shifts right, that means I can release the oxygen more easily from the hemoglobin. When I exercise, temperature goes up. So it means we have a mechanism in place to get at the oxygen more quickly. When I exercise, I make an environment that is more acidic, and increasing the acidity increases the ability of the hemoglobin to let go of oxygen. So when I'm exercising, the two things that happen both help me get more oxygen out of the bloodstream. That's the bottom line, right? If I'm exercising and I want to make ATP, I need more oxygen. The fact that the muscles get warm and the fact that we make the environment slightly acidic helps the oxygen leave the bloodstream and get into the muscle tissue. Make sense? Calvin got it. Did everybody else get it? Right. The curve shifts to the right. I can get the oxygen out of the bloodstream more easily. So, I don't know what is going on with the colour on these slides. It can't be the slide. It has to be that. Because the slide hasn't got a problem. Alright, so, when you look at this, this is in the book. They've made it quite complicated. It's obviously a lot more complicated than I'm saying. Alright? I'm trying to simplify it because you guys are not biochemists, we're PE teachers and coaches. Right? We need to understand the basic mechanism that's going on, because the basic mechanism adapts to training. Right? And so we've got to understand what is going on when I train someone. So, this is a little more complicated, but what I'm looking at is lung, blood, muscle. Okay? Can you see this? Yell at me if you can't see what I'm doing here with the light on, okay? So, if I want to move oxygen out of the lung into the blood, where's the high and where's the low? Which direction do we move in? Low to high or high to low? High to low. Alright, so if I want to move oxygen out of the lung into the bloodstream, I have to have a pressure gradient high to low. Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Does everybody understand? Right? Now, if I want to move the oxygen out of the bloodstream into the muscle tissue, which is high and which is low?
Low blood, low to high muscle.
Which direction does it go in?
Low to high. High to low. High to low.
High to low. So now, when I'm looking at the diagram, the pressure hasn't changed, right? And partial pressure of oxygen isn't different in the blood. You're looking at the gradient. What is the difference to the other side of the membrane? So in this case, I want oxygen to move from the lung into the bloodstream. That means that the pressure, PO2, pressure of oxygen in the lung has to be higher than the pressure of oxygen in the blood for it to move. When I get to the tissue level, I want the oxygen to move out of the bloodstream into the muscle tissue. High to low still counts, right? The rule never changes. It's a physics rule. Things move from high to low. So, now the bloodstream has to be high. It's not different than it was here. It's just different to the other side of the membrane. Yes? No? When I look at carbon dioxide, we create carbon dioxide. We can't use carbon dioxide in the muscle. I can't make energy out of it. I can't do anything with it. I want to get rid of it. I want to excrete it. So I'm going to dump carbon dioxide into the bloodstream. High pressure, low partial pressure, and it's going to get carried in the bloodstream around to the lungs, and then I want to dump it into the lungs so I can breathe it out. Partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream is higher than it is in the lungs, and so it can move out and I can breathe out. So that's really all this is doing. They've just added in the hemoglobin, binding to the hemoglobin, right? What's moving into the red blood cell? Right? We move oxygen in from the lungs, but we move carbon dioxide into the bloodstream from the muscle tissue. So it depends which membrane you're looking at as to which is high and which is low. It's all about being able to shift the oxygen that we need across the membrane. All right. Somewhat sense? Okay, high to low. It's always going to go high to low. It's just deciding which side of the membrane in that particular context is high and which side is low. So when we get down to the muscle then, when we're looking at this part of the picture, what do we see happen? Okay. Pressure difference across the membrane, and that allows the muscle to absorb oxygen. Once the oxygen is in the muscle, now which part of the muscle cell is responsible for making the most amount of ATP? Where do I have to be in the muscle cell? Which?
Mitochondria.
Mitochondria, very good. Right? So,
That's right.
mitochondria might not be sitting right by the wall of the muscle cell where the blood is and the oxygen is coming in. So I've got to get the oxygen across the muscle cell to the mitochondria. We use another little taxi called myoglobin. Hemoglobin is the taxi in the blood. Myoglobin, myo is always connected with muscle, is the taxi in the muscle cell. And it helps oxygen diffuse across the muscle cell to the mitochondria, and it also just has some oxygen. Remember when we said when we stand up suddenly or we jump suddenly, we use our ATP-PC system to create that extra energy. But my energy system 3 is still ticking over. There's still some oxygen available. Some of it is sitting on the myoglobin. Right. EPOC, another concept we talked about earlier in the semester. Right. When I stop exercising, why when I stop exercising and now I don't need energy, am I still going to get oxygen into the system? Because I stole oxygen from the taxi and I have to put it back. That's one of the reasons. There's several different factors. So over the semester we're building the picture as we go. So when we look here, my sea level into my lungs, out of my lungs into my bloodstream, round to the heart, around, here's my 100 that we had on the other diagram. My partial pressure in the muscle is pretty low, makes it easy for me to move oxygen out of the bloodstream into the muscle tissue. Then I add the fact that I'm creating heat and I'm creating an acidic environment. Both of those help the oxygen move into the muscle tissue, so we're able to get tons of oxygen. Our electron transport chain, remember our tennis balls. If I get to the end of the chain and I don't have oxygen sitting there to pick up the hydrogen, I can't make ATP. So we need lots and lots of oxygen getting into the muscle cell. This, all these ugly numbers, becomes really, really important when we start looking at what happens when you go up the mountain. Right? So we're going to come back to that idea when we look at altitude. I'm really sorry about the picture. I'm going to have to get IT over. Controlling ventilation. So what do I do to control ventilation then? All right. Some of it is voluntary. Most of it works without our voluntary control. Right? I don't have to sit here and remember to breathe in and out. It happens for me. So we have respiratory control centers in different places. We've got some in the carotid artery. We have some in the brain. And the respiratory control center in the brain just sets up like a rhythmical pattern. It acts a little bit like the SV node in the heart that we looked at. Okay. Sets up a rhythmical pattern that works based on how hard you're working at that time. If you start to exercise and your blood gas levels change then there are receptors that recognize your oxygen is higher or your carbon dioxide is higher. Okay. If I'm exercising more, carbon dioxide goes up in my bloodstream because I'm chucking it out from the muscle. So if I measure carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, it gets higher. And the little sensory systems recognize that carbon dioxide has gone up, and it changes your breathing. Let's see. So, swimmers use that idea. If you watch really good swimmers, when they dive in for a race, they want to stay under the water for as long as possible because we're more aerodynamic under the water. They can move faster and they can move further in a shorter period of time under the water than if they come up to the surface, because then we've got more surface drag and all this other air drag and other stuff, right? So they want to stay under for as long as they can. But we can only hold our breath for so long, and then we have to breathe. Well, it's not very good if you're 5 foot underwater taking a great big breath. So what swimmers will do is they trick their brain. So if you watch them when they're getting ready to dive in, they're going, right? Ever watched a swimming race? No, see the swimming race? You should watch some swimming races. Very interesting.
We've
So
seen them, but we don't see
what
them.
they're doing when they pant like that is they're blowing off carbon dioxide. If I get rid of this carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, then it makes my brain think that I don't need to breathe for a while. I don't need more oxygen because I'm not creating carbon dioxide, because my carbon dioxide levels are low. So it tricks your brain into allowing you to hold your breath for a little bit longer. So when they're panting, they're not breathing in more oxygen. That's not the mechanism that's going on. They're blowing off the carbon dioxide, and that tricks the brain into thinking it doesn't need to breathe. Pretty cool. Right? Don't do it with your beginner swimmers, because they'll all hyperventilate and pass out and end up in the hospital. Right? There's a fine line between and hyperventilating, which is a similar problem. When you hyperventilate, if you've ever seen anybody in a gym or a PE class or a training hyperventilate, I'm taking deep breaths and I'm trying to stay calm and I'm breathing out, and you blow off so much carbon dioxide that your brain stops breathing, and then you can't breathe. You literally get to a point where you can't breathe, and then you panic. Always carry a brown paper bag. You don't want to put a plastic bag over someone's face that can't breathe, not a good idea. But brown paper bag over their mouth, get them to try to breathe into the brown paper bag, then they have to breathe in carbon dioxide, and it helps the levels balance back out, and then the brain goes, oh, okay, I can breathe. Lots of tricks.
You do asthma too?
With asthma, no, because asthma's not, asthma is more a restriction within the bronchial pathway. I don't think it will work with asthma. I'll have to look that up. I don't think it would work with asthma because the reason they can't breathe is different. It's not because their brain switched off breathing, it's because of the restriction in the passageway. Okay, so Where was I? So, generally, ventilation is involuntary then, right? We breathe based on these mechanisms that the brain puts in place. We can voluntarily hold our breath, but only for a period of time. A 2-year-old can hold their breath for a very long period of time. They quite often will hold their breath until they go purple, and you have to like smack them on the back to make them breathe. But as adults, that's why people drown, right? You can only voluntarily change your breathing pattern for a short period of time. After that, the brain will kick in and make you breathe. So that's how people drown in car wrecks and things like that. So what happens then in the respiratory system when we exercise, right? Because we want to know what's going on from an adaptation point of view. If I'm training someone, what do I expect to see? Right? What should happen? Adaptation should be positive. It should help you do the exercise better, more efficiently, more easily. Right? So what do we see happen? So, most people, breathing's not a limiting factor. Right? You're going to adapt your breathing to the training. Right? We increase the blood flow, remember, through the lungs so that we can increase oxygen pickup. And we'll see, because all the writings disappeared on here, I can't read my writing on here. All right, phase 1. Prior to the start of exercise, breathing's pretty level. It'll start to go up just before you exercise, a little bit like heart rate. There's an anticipation of the exercise to come. You know you're going to exercise, your brain will get you to breathe a little bit differently to get ready for the required oxygen that you're going to need to exercise. Then we see a quick rise in ventilation to steady state. So if I'm going to go for a run for 20 minutes, half an hour, generally the first 3 to 5 minutes, I feel more puffed out than I do once I get into my rhythm. Right? Think about the terms you would normally use in every day. You guys know what that feels like. Right? When you start the run or you start the bike ride, you know, it's like it feels hard work, and then you just kind of get into the groove, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're running along or you're biking along, and it's just kind of very easy. Right? That's steady state. That means that I am meeting the energy requirement for the level of work that I'm working at. We see a little bit of fine-tuning for steady state, and then when we stop exercising, we see ventilation slowly drop down. Remember, it doesn't drop straight away. I'm going to breathe hard for a period of time at the end of the exercise to deal with evil. So, respiratory muscles. When do you not breathe? When do I start breathing? Let's put it that way.
Start or stop?
When do I start? At what point in my lifespan do I start breathing? When you're born. At what point do I stop breathing? So, are they anaerobic or aerobic muscles? Are they aerobic muscles, right? They have to work for a very long time, maybe 80 or 90 years, without hopefully stopping. So, respiratory muscles are highly aerobic, very, very good at using oxygen to make contractions. So the diaphragm, the little finger muscles that run around your rib cage, right, that help expand your rib cage. relatively fatigue resistant. So, not very often do you get cramping in these respiratory muscles. Right? They don't get fatigued. And there's some research out there that suggests that there's some training factor, right? So you can go online and find swimming breathing training, running breathing training. So I can make my respiratory muscles stronger doing certain exercises, and that means they won't have to work as hard when I stress them in a marathon or a swimming program, something like that. Okay? So they're trainable because they're aerobic. So for most people, then ventilation isn't a problem. If you're asthmatic, or if you have a chest infection, or you have an allergy problem, that's when ventilation can become difficult. Right? I can't breathe deeply enough because the bronchioles are constricted. There might be scar tissue in the bronchiole. And then when I get the air in, they're narrow, they don't dilate enough to get as much oxygen in as I need. So at some point in my workload, I'm no longer able to get in enough oxygen to make the energy I need to cope with what I'm doing. Right? So people with asthma have a very real physical issue with getting oxygen into their system to make ATP. So if you're working with students or athletes who have asthma, make sure they've got their medicine. They may or may not have a puffer. Right? Remind them that they need to take their puffer before exercising. It takes a while to kick in. The puffer will do the bronchial dilation for them, and that will help them move oxygen into the system to cope with the amount of work you want them to do. If their power output and their work output is going down and you don't feel like you've worked them that hard, then they're struggling. Pay attention. You're the coach, you're in charge, you've got to pay attention. Watch for the signs. Right? I haven't really been doing this for very long. Why are they slowing down already?